ALLATRA Global Research Center presents.
We are seeing people being diagnosed earlier compared to 50 years ago. We are seeing people being diagnosed with more aggressive disease of various kinds. And we are seeing people having worse outcome compared to what they used to. And this is despite of all the advancement we have been able to make in the medical science in general. Do we expect the rise in neurodegenerative diseases, disabilities, and so forth? I think we are already seeing that rise.
The rise in cancer rates worldwide is absolutely frightening. I think it's very legitimate to call it an epidemic. There's an increased rate of cancer worldwide in children and also in people much younger than I used to see. So what's going on now is that we're having a rise in people getting cancer, children, young adults, and it's probably not due to smoking or alcohol or anything. There seems to be something else, something in the environment that is causing this cancer at an alarming rate, and it's getting worse. So a very serious problem.
Diseases are emerging early in life. Today's generation is getting sick at ages when their parents were still healthy. And what's worse is that they're often battling not just one, but multiple chronic diseases simultaneously. How can this be happening despite all the advances in modern medicine? What if behind this rapid global decline in human health, there lies a hidden factor, one that we've overlooked all along?
Nanoplastics, a threat to life.
We're talking about microplastics, tiny particles that can't be seen with the naked eye. They're much thinner than a human hair, extremely fine.
From the molecular level to the scale of entire ecosystems, understanding microplastics is crucial for protecting the biosphere and public health.
I was also surprised that it took so long, to people to recognize that's a problem, because this plastic production increased super high in the 1950s, and we have now, I guess, something between 400 and 500 million tons of plastic production every year, and this keeps accumulating, and in all our ecosystems. So it's not only affecting the human life, but the whole ecosystem. So it's every individual, every plant, even bacteria. They take them up. So that's something which we have to take into account.
The fact that it now pervades from our deepest ocean to our highest mountain, that it's present in more or less every living sample that scientists have looked at, and in some populations in considerable proportions, and that it's now pervading, our food, drink, and the air we breathe, to me, is quite concerning.
The science has clearly, without a doubt, shown that these chemicals, these particles are very harmful for us in various ways, not just one organ system, but all organ systems are affected.
Plastic symbolizes progress, a triumph of human ingenuity, a material that is light, strong, and built to last forever. Yet, as humanity, we miss something crucial. We fail to notice how the very material created to improve our lives began instead to endanger them. Unfortunately, people often underestimate the true threat posed by plastics. Many think of it merely as an environmental problem. Bottles scattered on beaches, debris floating across the sea. And yes, these do pollute our planet. But large plastic pieces alone cannot destroy the entire biosphere, including humanity, unlike the microscopic particles they eventually become. This plastic bottle, in this form, it poses no immediate danger. But everything changes once this solid object disintegrates into masses of microscopic fragments. If this half-liter bottle were broken down into plastic particles just 1 micrometer in size, it would create roughly 10 trillion of them. And if all those particles were to penetrate the cells of a human body at once, this single bottle, in the form of nanoparticles, would destroy a person within minutes. Micro and nanoplastics are a threat to life itself. And by life, we mean not only human existence, but the very survival of the entire biosphere. Scientists are sounding the alarm that even today, exposure to these particles is leading to deterioration of health, as well as physical and cognitive decline across humankind. A growing body of research links micro and nanoplastics to the development of diseases, genetic mutations, and the rise of antibiotic resistance. Some researchers even associate tiny plastics with climate anomalies, natural disasters, and increase in seismic activity as trillions of microscopic particles interact with the environment. Over time, they could create uninhabitable zones across our planet. And all of this begins with a simple chain reaction. When plastic, like this very plastic bottle, breaks down into micro and nanoplastics. This documentary is a result of a large-scale investigation. We have examined hundreds of scientific studies and thousands of facts to answer key questions, like why are plastics so particularly dangerous? How can plastic particles threaten the very foundation of life? And what chances remain for humanity to change its course? Today, only a few hundred, perhaps a few thousand people truly understand the magnitude of this threat. A number far too small for a world of 8 billion. But by watching this documentary, you will become one of the few who understand what's really happening. This is a story of why researchers studying nanoplastics call them the #1 killer, and how they're already reshaping our future.
Plastic interferes with the universal language of life. We are living in an era when life on Earth is disappearing faster than ever since the age of the dinosaurs. Currently, the extinction rate of species is 1,000 times higher than the natural extinction rates, making our time one of the most devastating periods in all of history in terms of biodiversity loss. The 6th mass extinction is already underway. The modern world is plunging into a biological collapse, like the ones in the past that wiped out up to 90% of all living creatures on the planet. While past global catastrophes were driven by volcanic eruptions or meteor impacts, today a new factor has joined these forces of nature, an invisible enemy created by humans, capable of destroying all life. Plastics are everywhere. Since the mid-20th century, humanity has produced more than 9 billion tons of plastic, a material that was meant to make life easier, but has instead become a deadly trap for nature and for humanity. It is well established that most plastic is never recycled. Professor Antonio Ragusa, an Italian obstetrician gynecologist and researcher who first identified microplastic in the human placenta, explains how it continues its journey through the biosphere.
Of the millions and millions of tons of plastic we produce, less than 10% gets recycled. More than 90% is dumped into the environment. And when plastic gets dumped into the environment, it slowly breaks down into smaller and smaller particles, eventually becoming very small, microplastics, or even tiny nanoplastics. These particles travel down rivers, reach the seas, spread throughout the oceans, and enter the fish we later eat, so they end up back inside us.
The problem of microplastics has long been observed in ecosystems across the globe. Today, we are accustomed to hearing the word microplastic. But there was a time when this term simply didn't exist. Professor Richard Thompson is a marine biologist at the University of Plymouth, director of the Marine Institute, officer of the Order of the British Empire, and fellow of the Royal Society. In his work, he was the first to describe microscopic plastic particles in the marine environment, laying the foundation for an entirely new field of research.
When I started to teach, I set the challenge to some of my students. They went out onto the shoreline, they collected samples of sand, and we started to look at them under the microscope. And from the very first samples, we could see pieces that did not look like sand grains, brightly coloured pieces, red and blue. And it was then almost a kind of forensic journey to confirm their identity. And we confirmed that they were indeed plastics. We showed that they were present around the UK in a range of different habitats, in sediments and in the water column. And interestingly, in that first paper in 2004, my first paper on the topic, we used the term microplastics. And the term hadn't been used in this context for truly microscopic pieces before. There had been, and we referenced them in our paper, some studies of small pieces of plastic before, but we went smaller than anybody else. We showed this bioavailability. We showed the temporal trend of increasing over time.
The ocean is the main reservoir of plastic accumulation. It already contains more than 200 million tons of plastic waste, and this amount continues to grow every day. It is important to understand that plastic does not disappear. Under the influence of sunlight, waves, salinity, and mechanical friction, it breaks down into microplastics and nanoplastics. Microplastics are plastic particles smaller than 5 millimeters in size, while nanoplastics are smaller than 1 micrometer, about 1,000 times thinner than a human hair. There are about 350 trillion microplastic particles in the surface layer of the ocean alone. Yet the real number is far greater. Scientists estimate that roughly 90% of nanoplastic particles are too small to be detected by current analytical instruments. As water evaporates from the surface of oceans and other bodies of water, microplastic particles rise into the atmosphere together with the water vapor. Dr. Dusan Materic, an environmental analyst at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, Germany, leads a research group dedicated to the study of nanoplastics. Dr. Materic investigates atmospheric nanoplastics at the Sonnenblick Observatory in Austria, the oldest high-altitude research station in Europe.
And for those nanoplastics that fragments from big fibers, because of UV weathering, because of just mechanical forces, those shredding nanoplastics are much more potent to stay in the air for a long, long period, and that means picked up and brought even here at 3,106 meters above sea level. So what we discovered is that we have nanoplastics across all the stations, and we have nanoplastics even in the deepest ocean environment, and our deepest point is below 5,000 meters.
Micro and nanoparticles in the atmosphere can travel thousands of kilometers, crossing from one continent to another. This is noted by Dr. Elke Ludewig from Austria, who heads the Sonnenblick Observatory and the European Center for Cloud Ambient Intercomparison, where the transport of these particles and the effects of this process are recorded.
We know from different cases that we have really long transports of particles from, for example, Japan up to here, or Canada, for example. There are two examples I can tell you. The one is the accident in Fukushima. It took about 11 days until particles, aerosol particles with a higher radiation, received the Sonnenblick Observatory. Another example was in 2025, on the 9th of June, there was a kind of transport, an air mass from Canada received the station here. We could see it in the sky. Of course, we could see it in our data that we had higher aerosol concentration, but the really impressive moment was, and that's why it's also important to have stuff up here, we could really smell the burn in the air. And this lasts for the whole day. So there you can see how intense effects somewhere on the globe, especially on the North Hemisphere, can be, and it's still transported hundreds of kilometers around the North Hemisphere, and we can measure it here and show what it is.
Atmospheric micro and nanoplastics then return to Earth with precipitation, falling with rain or snow and settling in forests, on farmland, and across grasslands, where they seep into the soil and penetrate plants. This is happening all over the planet, in both the northern and southern hemispheres. Liliana Cáceres Sanchez, MSc in Science, Technology and Health, a biologist specializing in ecotoxicology and environmental protection, and a researcher at the Center for Research in Exact Sciences and Engineering at the Bolivian Catholic University San Pablo, notes that microplastics are present in natural environments, in living organisms, and in food products.
In recent years, we've conducted analyses of soil, air, and both surface and groundwater in Cochabamba. We have also examined lakes and lagoons, and in all of these samples, we have found microplastics. The fact that we found microplastics even in areas with no human presence suggests that microplastic particles are actively moving through the environment. In addition, we identified their presence in food and in living organisms. We detected microplastics in milk and other pasteurized products such as yogurt. They were also found in wild animals, for example, in the Titicaca water frog and in fish from a lake near Cochabamba called Angostura. These findings confirm that microplastics have already become part of our food chain and ecological chain.
Due to microplastic pollution, 1 in 10 grains of the world's 3 main food crops, rice, wheat, and corn, may die before harvest. In addition, researchers from the University of Catania have found high concentrations of microplastic particles in apples, pears, carrots, potatoes, lettuce, and broccoli. Overall, apples and carrots contained the highest levels of contamination, and fruits were found to have more plastic particles than vegetables. On dairy farms in several countries, microplastic particles have been found in samples of hay and other types of cattle feed. The presence of microplastics has also been confirmed in the milk and meat of cows and sheep, as well as in the lung tissue of pigs and in the stomachs and intestines of domestic ducks. This means that plastic has now become inseparable from livestock farming. Scientists from the University of Newcastle in Australia estimate that the average person today consumes around 250 grams of plastic per year through food, the weight equivalent of 50 plastic bags. Moreover, humans inhale micro and nanoplastics. According to studies, an adult can inhale up to 106,000 microplastic particles during a 2-hour walk in a large city. And in areas near bodies of water, that number significantly increases. We encounter micro and nanoplastic every day when we brush our teeth, take a shower, eat, run errands, go for a walk, wear our clothes, use household appliances, or take medications, and when we are working on a computer, riding public transport, drinking coffee on the go, shopping in a supermarket, or relaxing outdoors. Micro and nanoplastics are everywhere, and we barely notice how deeply these particles have become embedded in our everyday lives today.
There are 3 ways plastic gets into the body: through inhalation, through the skin, and through food. And what happens next? It enters the bloodstream. Until fairly recently, about 15 years ago, people thought plastic was inert. And in fact, if you look at these plastic pellets, not microplastics but larger macroplastics, even if you put them in water, they just sit there quietly. It seems like they don't interfere much with the environment. But once they break down into micro and nanoplastics, they get into the human body through those 3 pathways, enter the bloodstream, and from there reach all the parenchymal tissues, that is, the organs, kidneys, liver, heart, arteries, veins, placenta, breast milk.
Micro and nanoplastics have already become an inseparable part of the human body. They accumulate in the tissues of the intestines, heart muscles, and in the endocrine and reproductive organs, disrupting their functions. There isn't a single place in the human body they cannot penetrate. Studies show that the highest concentrations of nanoplastic have been found precisely in human brain tissue. Professor Lucas Kenner, a pathologist, cancer researcher, director of the Christian Doppler Laboratory for Applied Metabolomics, and scientific director of the Micro-1 project studying microplastic and its effects on health, explains how micro and nanoplastic particles can evade the body's defense mechanisms and reach the brain within just a few hours.
And we found out that particles which are in the bloodstream and cover themselves with cholesterol molecules, they easily can enter the blood-brain barrier, which is a very strict body barrier and protects the brain from toxic outside or even therapeutic substances. So it's, it's difficult, for instance, to to treat brain tumors because the blood-brain barrier is so strict also for medications. But particles can enter quickly because they cover themselves with molecules will help them enter the blood-brain barrier. And this is for me, it was really very striking to see that, that these particles in 2 hours after we give them an oral gavage, they're already in the brain.
Scientists at the University of New Mexico have found that in every gram of brain tissue in middle-aged individuals, there are about 4,900 micrograms of plastic. This means that today, around 0.5% of the human brain is composed of plastic. Simple calculations show that the human brain contains on average around 7 grams of plastic, roughly the weight of a plastic teaspoon. And such a teaspoon is already inside the human head. It is well known that micro and nanoplastics are dangerous because of toxic chemical additives they contain, such as phthalates and bisphenols. Treating diseases associated with just 3 chemicals of the most toxic additives found in plastics costs humanity $1.5 trillion a year. But this is only the tip of the iceberg, as overall, more than 16,000 chemical compounds are used in the production of various types of plastics, each carrying its own potential risks to human health. Yet there is another factor, one far more dangerous and still vastly underestimated, in how nanoplastics affect the human body. It is precisely this factor that allows nanoplastics to easily penetrate the body's protective barriers, and once inside, they are virtually impossible to remove.
The destructive impact of plastics at the chemical level has already been examined in another documentary, A Trap for Humanity, part of which focused on the toxic additives in plastics and their devastating effects for human health. Now, the dangers from chemicals are, of course, the most visible and widely discussed part of the problem. But as our investigation continued, we realized that the true danger of plastics lie beyond the chemistry, extending much deeper into the realm of physics. To understand why plastic particles are so dangerous, we must first understand their unique physical properties.
Unique properties of plastic. At the micro and nanoscale, plastic particles acquire new physico-chemical properties. They can retain surface charge for longer periods and interact with electrostatic fields and other molecules. In this sense, micro and nanoplastics can be compared to an electret, a material that accumulates static electricity and holds it for an extended time. Moreover, plastic particles not only retain an electrostatic charge, but can also recharge it. This occurs through the triboelectric effect. That is, when plastic comes into contact with or rubs against other surfaces, including fabrics, cells, and liquids. In other words, plastic particles can recharge themselves, restoring their electrostatic charge again and again.
To understand how the properties of plastic differ from those of other materials, we conducted a simple experiment. Here, inside transparent plastic cups, we suspended several objects made of different materials: a metal needle, a wooden matchstick, a copper wire, and a strip of magnesium. Now, while these objects remained motionless when a plastic rod was brought close, everything changed dramatically when we rubbed the plastic rod against the wall. That is, all the suspended object began swinging and moved toward the rod. So, what caused this reaction? The answer lies in the electrostatic charge that formed on the plastic surface. For example, a wooden rod, unlike plastic, cannot hold such a charge. Even after rubbing it with wool, the material caused no movement. The same was true for metal scissors, which showed no effect until the material touched a magnet. Only then did the metal needle respond. So this experiment clearly shows how material responds differently to electric and magnetic fields. Now, plastic stands out among other materials because it can not only accumulate, but also retain electrostatic charge for a prolonged period. This is distinct from wood, which quickly dissipates charge because of its moisture content, and therefore has little effect on other nearby objects. it's a dielectric material. Metals, on the other hand, do not hold charge but quickly redistributes it across their surface. They're conductors. Magnets, meanwhile, create magnetic rather than electric fields and thus cannot attract electrically neutral objects in the way a charged plastic can. So this is what makes electrostatically charged plastic so dangerous. It is an invisible force capable of changing everything around it. Once charged, plastic can attract even neutral particles, disrupting many natural physical processes. And as plastics breaks down into smaller fragments, micro and nanoplastics, it doesn't lose its properties. In fact, the impact of plastic on the environment and living organisms only intensifies as the particles become smaller. It's the charge that makes plastic especially dangerous to all life on our planet.
Therefore, plastic cannot be regarded as passive waste. It is an active, electrically charged material capable of interacting with nearly all substances on Earth, from atmospheric particles to living cells. The smaller the plastic particle, the more active it becomes, and the more dangerous its impact.
If you view a microplastic particle and it's 5 millimeters in diameter, and you break it down to a nanoplastic particle, which is 1 micrometer in size, you generate from one particle 125 billion particles, which is the number of galaxies we have in the universe. And the surface of these particles is 5,000 times larger than the 5 millimeter particle. So this just exemplifies how big an issue the breakdown of those plastic particles in even and all the time smaller particles. And these particles have maybe total different properties than the large 5 millimeter particles. So you not only change the size, but also the surface and the properties of the particles.
Nanoplastic has an enormous surface area compared to its mass. It's like a tiny grain with the surface area of a football field. This is called a high specific surface area. The larger the surface, the greater the particle's ability to accumulate and retain electrostatic charge, and the more active sites it contains that bind proteins, metal ions, lipids, and other molecules from the surrounding environment can attach. To understand how dangerous these tiny charged particles are, let's run a simple mental experiment. For example, we have an ordinary 1.5-volt battery. If we divide it into 125 billion tiny batteries, and suppose each of them still had the same power output of 1.5 volts, their aggregate power would equal 187.5 billion volts. Imagine how much greater the voltage will become. Similar things happen with plastic. When a single fragment of plastic is divided into 125 billion particles, each carrying a charge, the amount of charge increases.
Today, millions of tons of plastic in our biosphere are constantly breaking down into smaller and smaller particles, each carrying an electrostatic charge that allows it to penetrate everywhere. Consequently, as the number of electrostatically charged plastic particles grows, and excess electrical potential builds up throughout our planet. This is a major factor disrupting the Earth's energy balance, contributing to warming of the oceans, increase in atmospheric anomalies, as well as the number and severity of natural disasters each year. Note that the warmer the ocean, the more acidic it gets, and the faster plastic breaks down into charged micro-nanoplastics. This in turn leads to greater buildup of energy on our planet, amplifying all these processes in a self-reinforcing chain reaction. In addition, the smaller the particle, the more easily it penetrates the protected barrier of living organisms, including humans, triggering various chronic diseases and killing millions of people. We'll explore all of this in detail.
In other words, plastic fragmentation does not make it safer. On the contrary, it transforms it into nanoparticles that readily penetrate living organisms.
We know so far that compared to microplastics, nanoplastics can pass through the cell membranes much easily. That means that they can go to our bloodstream, not just us animals as well, and they can be carried to certain organs deposited there, hard to be excreted back and things like that.
This is why nanoplastic is far more dangerous than microplastic, as its capacity to accumulate electrostatic charge is significantly greater.
Due to their electrolyte behavior and small size, plastics do not remain inert particles. They become charged and transform into trillions of micro and nano killers. It is through this charge that tiny plastics can penetrate deep into the living tissues and even destroy them. Today, these particles are everywhere, and they're already interfering with the delicate electrical processes in nature. Now, we often think of electricity as something artificial, confined to light bulbs, batteries, and wires. But in reality, electrical impulses are the very language of life. That is, they enable the entire biosphere to function. And it is precisely these natural processes that electrostatically charged micro and nanoplastics are now disrupting.
Universal language of nature. The universal language of nature is invisible, yet it is what connects all living beings into a single whole. Forests. In forests, tree roots are linked with fungal networks, forming a complex and interconnected system beneath the soil that scientists call the Wood Wide Web. This network not only distributes water and nutrients, but also enables plants to exchange information. Plants communicate in two major ways: chemically, by releasing specific molecules, and electrically, by sending electrical signals similar to nerve impulses in animals and humans. For example, when insects attack, a tree generates an electrical signal that triggers defensive responses. This signal can travel through roots into the fungal network, reaching other trees. A similar effect was detected by scientists during a solar eclipse. The bioelectric signals of trees began to synchronize, forming a single impulse. The oldest trees responded first, as if they remembered such events, and were warning the younger ones. Through electrical signals, plants can coordinate their growth, warn each other of danger, adapt collectively to stress, and even store shared memory. It is precisely this finely tuned system that is now being disrupted by micro and nanoplastics. Today, forests have become vast reservoirs of microplastics. Research shows that forests capture microplastic from the atmosphere. As air currents pass through forests, they carry tons of microplastic particles. The forest functions as a massive filter. Tree canopies and leaves literally comb out particles from the air. In the past, this process helped purify the atmosphere from dust and dirt. Today, however, along with these natural particles, micro and nanoplastic are also being trapped. Unlike dust, which can become part of organic matter, plastic does not decompose. It remains in leaves, accumulates in soil, and persists in forest air. Every day, dozens of microplastic particles settle on each square meter of the forest canopy. Scientists estimated the annual deposition of microplastics in forest soils and showed that it correlates with the scale of plastic production in Europe. Assuming that atmospheric fallout is the primary source, they concluded that roughly 400,000 microplastic particles per square meter could accumulate in forest soil over a 70-year period. Charged particles distort bioelectrical signals and deprive forests of their ability to adapt and survive. Negatively charged nanoparticles penetrate plant roots more easily, disrupting nutrient absorption. As a result, growth slows down and root formation is impaired. In addition, electrostatically charged micro and nanoparticles of plastic adhere to leaves and penetrate plant cells, impairing photosynthesis. They damage chloroplasts, the energy centers of plant cells, the analog of mitochondria in animal and human cells. Prolonged exposure to micro and nanoplastics reduces the ability of plants to produce oxygen. Some of the world's forests, such as the eastern forests of the Amazon, are already emitting more carbon dioxide than they produce oxygen. Animals. Micro and nanoplastics can penetrate the brains of animals. Electrostatically charged plastic particles damage brain cells and disrupt the transmission of nerve impulses. This causes malfunctions in the nervous system, from reduced vision, hearing, and smell to impaired motor coordination. As a result, animals struggle to navigate, find food, avoid danger, and to communicate with one another. And all of this greatly reduces their chances of survival. These effects mirror the early signs of neurodegenerative diseases in humans. According to the Worldwide Fund for Nature, over the past 50 years, the global population of wild animals has declined by nearly 70%. People can't even protect those they've taken responsibility for. Household pets are also poisoned by micro and nanoplastics. Pet food contains PET, the same plastic used to make bottles. Moreover, microplastic particles have been found in the tissues of cats and dogs. Scientists analyzed tissue samples from 49 animals, 24 cats and 25 dogs, that had died of natural causes and found that more than 70% of them had microplastics present in multiple organs. Insects. The rate of insect extinction is 8 times higher than that of mammals, birds, or reptiles. The crisis is especially severe for pollinators, bees, whose role in ecosystems and agriculture is critical. Wild and domesticated bees pollinate 75% of agricultural crops and 90% of wild flowering plants. More than 30% of the world's food production depends on bees. Today, populations of honeybees and wild bees are declining rapidly. If this trend continues, half of all bee populations may disappear within the next decade. The disappearance of bees means the loss of the link that connects plants and food, nature, and humanity. Studies by Indian researchers have identified a correlation between microplastic pollution and declining populations of insects. Bees interact with their environment through electrical impulses. They navigate not only by scent, color, and flower shape, but also, remarkably, by sensing a flower's electric field. When a bee approaches a flower, they communicate through the electrical field. As bees fly, friction with the air gives their bodies a positive charge, while flowers, being grounded, carry a negative charge. This difference creates an electric field that allows pollen to transfer to the bee even before it lands. Experiments have shown that bees can distinguish flowers by their electric fields, associate specific electrical signals with the presence of nectar, and even determine a flower's freshness by the strength of its residual charge. After a flower has been visited, its electric field weakens, and other bees can read the signal that the flower contains less nectar. Moreover, the bee's own electric charge can stimulate a plant to release fragrance, attracting even more pollinators. Thus, an entire electrical communication system operates between bees and flowers. The electrostatic charge carried by micro and nanoplastics distorts these electrical impulses, affecting the bee's brain and nervous system. As a result, bees can no longer recognize flowers, locate nectar, find its way home, or identify members of their colony. Even the smallest doses of microplastics can be lethal to bees. Bees are covered in sensitive hairs and constantly interact with their environment, allowing plastic particles to settle on their bodies and easily penetrate them. One of the leading experts studying the impact of microplastics on insects is Professor David Baraki, PhD in ecology and animal ethology, biologist, and head of the Cognitive and Behavioral Ecology Lab, B-Lab, at the University of Florence.
We already know from our studies and studies from other colleagues that, for instance, the microplastic can affect the gut microbiome. So if they feed with microplastics, this can generate dysbiosis, or the microbiota can be affected. In the same way, we found that it can affect the immune response. So both honeybees and bumblebees have kind of immune depression, so they are not any longer able to fight infections. And they can also show altered behavior. So for instance, again, learning and memory is affected. Polyethylene doesn't seem to harm too much honeybees. And polyestyrene had a strong impact, not only on survival, but also on learning and memory. So in our experiment, we really found that this polymer, concentration that we probably can find in environment can actually impair memory formation and memory retrieval. And this is, of course, alarming because for honeybees, it's, as I said, it's very, very important to have a good learning and memory capabilities.
When microplastics enter a bee's body through food or air, they damage the intestine, disrupt metabolism and reproductive function, weaken the immune system, and alter their behavior, even to the point of losing the ability to navigate. Birds. Across the globe, scientists are observing an alarming trend. The number of wild birds is rapidly declining. In North America alone, over the past 50 years, approximately 3 billion birds have disappeared. That is a quarter of the entire bird population. Electrical signals play as vital a role in the lives of birds as they do throughout the entire biosphere. The avian nervous system functions through transmission of electrical signals from the brain to all parts of the body. Those impulses control movements of wings, tail, and body in flight, vision and coordination, cognitive responses, for example, evading predators, song and vocal communication. Birds are true living navigators capable of traveling thousands of kilometers and returning precisely to the same locations year after year. Scientists have discovered that many migratory birds use Earth's magnetic field for orientation. Imagine an airplane. A pilot sees a radar screen with lines and markers to avoid getting lost in the sky. For birds, their eyes serve as such a radar. Specialized molecules in their eyes detect both light and Earth's magnetic field, converting them into electrical signals. In the brain, those signals form an image with field lines superimposed on the real world. A bird simultaneously sees clouds, land, and its magnetic radar, allowing it to maintain course in any direction with ease. Electrostatically charged micro and nanoplastic particles entering a bird's body distort electrical impulses and disrupt functioning of its nervous system. This leads to loss of motor coordination, weakened memory and learning ability, and impaired vocalization and spatial orientation. Externally, this manifests as increasingly erratic flight, unstable behavior, and even softer, weakened chirping. Nestlings are especially vulnerable. Many do not survive to adulthood, and those that do often exhibit cognitive impairments. However, that's not all. Plastics damage the liver, kidneys, stomach, and brain of birds, causing symptoms that resemble Alzheimer's disease. Even birds that appear healthy lose the ability to adequately care for their partners and offspring, sharply reducing their chances of successful reproduction. Marine life. Beneath the surface reigns a unique world where vision weakens and sounds become distorted. In such conditions, marine life perceives reality differently, through electroreception. the ability to sense faint electric fields and navigate by them. Predators such as sharks can detect tiny electrical impulses produced by muscle contractions and the heartbeat of their prey. Even if a fish remains motionless and hidden in sand, its bioelectric signals reveal its location. All living organisms in water generate continuous bioelectric fields due to ion flow across their skin. Those fields are subtly altered when the animal moves or when another living being appears nearby. Electrical impulses are an inseparable part of life itself, even underwater. Electrostatically charged micro and nanoplastics can distort or block those signals, which makes marine creatures especially vulnerable. As a result, marine animals and fish lose their ability to accurately locate prey, avoid predators, and follow migration routes. This threatens their survival and leads to population declines. Furthermore, fish exposed to microplastics exhibit a wide range of toxic effects, from immune system dysfunction to altered blood composition. Signs of neurotoxicity, growth retardation, and reduced reproductive capacity have also been documented in fish. All processes in the biosphere rely on extremely subtle electrical impulses. It is these impulses that become distorted by electrostatically charged micro and nanoplastic. Micro and nanoplastics have already permeated every environment and integrated into all ecosystems. The examples given here represent only a small part of a global problem. Disruptions are occurring throughout the biosphere without exception, and the outcome is the same everywhere. Distortion of signal transmission, breakdown of biological connections, malfunction of living systems, and ultimately, the death of life itself. Micro and nanoplastics are everywhere, and everything they touch is slowly dying.
Charged micro and nanoplastics disturb the natural biological impulses that form the very foundation of life. Gradually, they erode the mechanisms that allow the biospheres to exist and interact. This decay begins from within, slowly, almost imperceptibly, yet inevitably. Even what appears healthy and alive today is already contaminated by micro and nanoplastics. Today, so many of these particles have already accumulated on our planet that they will be enough to destroy the entire biosphere several times over. And their numbers continue to grow each day. Nature is not merely a habitat. It's our breath, our nourishment, and our protection. Humanity can survive without technology, but not without air, water, and living organisms. When life on Earth dies, humanity dies with it. The truth is that we do not exist separately from nature, no matter how much we try to convince ourselves otherwise. We're part of it. So you have probably guessed who we're going to talk about next. Yes, about us.
Impulse of life. For humans, just like for all living beings in the biosphere, electrical signals are the pulse of life. The human body is, quite literally, an electrical system. The brain thinks with the help of electrical impulses. The heart beats because cells transmit electrical signals to one another, and muscles contract when they receive signals from the nervous system. Neurons play a key role in coordinating all body functions by generating and transmitting electrical impulses. How an electrical impulse is generated in neurons? Every neuron has a membrane with the so-called gates, ion channels. When a signal needs to be transmitted, some of these gates open, and ions begin moving quickly into or out of the cell. This flow of ions changes the membrane's electrical charge, creating an electrical impulse. The impulse travels along the neuron and transmits information further to other cells. How you communicate, whether you interrupt, speak quickly and emotionally, or on the contrary, whether you're apathetic, how you scroll through a news feed on your phone, whether you rush or move slowly, depends largely on the balance of ions. When this balance is disrupted, a person can become overly irritable, or, on the contrary, sluggish. Every movement and reaction of our body is based on electrical impulses in neurons and other cells. For example, if you accidentally touch a hot object, nerve fibers instantly transmit a signal to the brain, which commands the muscles. Pull your hand away. Without electrical impulses, the body wouldn't be able to maintain a stable internal state, homeostasis. Even the immune system cannot function without electrical impulses. The speed and strength of every immune cell's response depend directly on the quality of impulse transmission. Emotions and thoughts are also the language of electrical impulses. When you feel joy, sadness, excitement, love, or recall a memory, tiny electrical sparks run between neurons. They're like messages between friends. One neuron writes, another reads, and passes it on. Through these chains, thoughts, emotions, and decisions are born. When you learn something new, that too is the work of electrical impulses. They create new neural connections, as if paving little pathways in the brain that make it easier for impulses to travel later on. Even at the very beginning of life, when a sperm cell fertilizes an egg, an extraordinary phenomenon occurs. This contact triggers a cascade of biochemical reactions, including the release of billions of zinc ions. This impulse acts like a start button that activates the egg and initiates the very process from which the future embryo begins to develop.
We rarely think of ourselves as electrical systems, yet that's exactly how our bodies function. Nature created a perfect design in which countless vital processes and interactions occur through electrical impulses. But there was one thing that nature could not have foreseen: that humans would create an enemy capable of infiltrating and disrupting this perfect mechanism. In studying micro and nanoplastics, we discovered that their most dangerous weapon is invisible. It is the electrostatic charge that these particles accumulate and retain. This charge begins to destroy us from within, starting from the very foundation of life, the cell. Inside the cell, charged nanoplastics cause the greatest harm. They disrupt communications between the cells, trigger self-destruction programs, and deprive cells of their ability to generate energy for sustaining life. The question is, how do plastics do this?
How do micro and nanoplastics damage the body's cells? Disruption of interactions between neurons. Electrostatic charge and extremely small size allow nanoplastic particles to penetrate inside human cells. The impact of nanoplastics on cell function can be clearly traced in neurons, cells of the nervous system, as their function is directly linked to the generation and transmission of electrical signals. Valérie Etkin, Doctor of Physical and Mathematical Sciences and member of the European Academy of Natural Sciences, emphasizes that the impact of nanoplastics on nerve cells manifests at the most fundamental levels.
Nanoplastics significantly influence the generation and transmission of neural impulses through multiple mechanisms that disrupt ion transport and the electrical activity of neurons responsible for transmitting nerve signals in the body.
Each neuron functions like a miniature battery. It constantly maintains a difference in electrical charge between the inside and outside of its membrane. This enables the neuron to be ready to transmit a signal at the right moment. Charged nanoplastic disturbs this delicate balance, making the cell behave unpredictably. A neuron may activate prematurely, like a light flickering on without command, or conversely, fail to transmit a signal when needed. Such interference disrupts the operation of entire neural networks, like a city experiencing power outages, where neighborhoods go dark one after another, leading to a blackout. In addition, as shown by research conducted by Chinese scientists from Southern Medical University in Guangzhou, nanoplastic interferes with the operation of ion channels. Nanoplastic carrying an electrostatic charge can interact with these channels, and alter their structure. As a result, the gates may fail to open or remain open for too long. This also disturbs normal signal transmission throughout the nervous system.
When electrostatic interactions occur with charged membrane lipids, they cause a redistribution of charged lipids and proteins within the membrane, which leads to impaired functionality of these lipid membranes. This results in localized changes in ion concentration and the formation of ion concentration gradients around charged particles. The function of ion pumps, which are essential for maintaining ion balance, becomes disrupted. Ion pumps are mechanisms that move substances against their concentration gradients, a process known as active transport. When these processes become unbalanced, they accumulate energy that can later be used by biological systems to perform work. And so, the work of these pumps may be disrupted, yet it's one of the core mechanisms underlying biological activity.
Signal transmission between neurons is a complex yet remarkably coordinated electrochemical communication process in which special molecules, neurotransmitters, play a crucial role. These molecules act as couriers, transferring information from one neuron to another in a strictly ordered manner. Nanoplastic particles carrying an electrostatic charge can interfere with the release of neurotransmitters or trigger their discharge without proper signaling. As a result, chaotic and false signals emerge in the brain, as if the nervous system can no longer distinguish what messages to send, when to send them, or where they should go.
Any disruption in communication between neurons inevitably affects our mental state. If you find yourself becoming forgetful or absent-minded, if you have difficulty concentrating or remembering even simple things, it may be a sign that the degradation of neural connections has already begun. Nanoplastics not only interfere with communications between neurons, but they also penetrate directly into cells and even trigger their self-destruction.
Cells start the process of self-destruction. Each cell continuously produces specific molecules known as reactive oxygen species. These molecules participate in processes of growth, division, and programmed cell death. Under normal conditions, their levels are regulated by the cell's defense system, antioxidants, acting as cleaners. Antioxidants rapidly neutralize excess reactive oxygen species, preventing them from damaging the organism. When a cell is exposed to irritants, such as infection, injury, or toxins, it produces elevated levels of reactive oxygen species, which in excess can damage vital cellular structures. This leads to oxidative stress, a kind of chemical assault within the cell. In response to damage and oxidative stress, a natural defense mechanism is activated: inflammation. Its purpose is to eliminate the source of injury and restore balance. However, in the case of electrostatically charged nanoplastic, this mechanism ceases to function properly. Plastic particles remain inside the cell and act as a continuous irritant. The inflammation does not subside and becomes chronic. As a result, DNA, proteins, membranes, and other key cellular structures are damaged. Ultimately, the cell either can no longer function properly or initiates its own self-destruction.
We've done remarkable studies and discovered that plastic embeds itself inside the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm contains organelles, small structures that keep the cell alive and functioning. Plastic gets into the cytoplasm and stays there. It becomes surrounded by a membrane. Similar to the cell membrane, the cell isolates it because it wants to destroy it. And it starts producing enzymes and other substances the cell normally uses when it's invaded by microbes, viruses, bacteria, or antigens. But unlike those natural invaders, plastic is indestructible, as we said. So the cell is essentially subjected to chronic stress, and eventually it becomes diseased.
The Microplastics Research Group at the Bolivian Catholic University in Cochabamba uses aquatic planarians, small organisms that serve as highly useful biological models. Their strong regenerative capacity makes it possible to detect early changes in cellular processes similar to those that occur in other animals. Microplastics, especially when combined with other pollutants such as metals, are already affecting living organisms. Microplastics can trigger oxidative stress, an imbalance between the production of reactive oxygen species and the body's antioxidant capacity. This oxidative stress directly affects cellular metabolism, disrupting the functions of proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids, which can lead to changes in growth, regeneration, and the overall physiology of organisms.
Thus, exposure to electrostatically charged nanoplastic leads to oxidative stress, inflammation, and consequently, the death of not only neurons, but also other types of cells.
Oxidative stress is like a fire burning inside a cell, while antioxidants are like firefighters that work to extinguish it. Note that nanoplastics act as a fuel for the fire, feeding it endlessly until the cell is consumed from within. Yet, that's not all nanoplastics do inside our cells. They also destroy the cell's power plants, the mitochondria. Every cell lives and functions thanks to the energy produced by mitochondria. That very energy powers all processes in the body, from cell division to hormone synthesis. Even the electrical impulses that we've been talking about depend on the energy from mitochondria. And it is precisely this vital source of life that charged nanoplastics attack.
Cells stop producing energy for life. Recent studies have shown that mitochondria are particularly vulnerable to the effects of nanoplastic. And that's where a cascade of processes leading to aging and disease begins. Scientists from China have discovered that the electrostatic charge and tiny size of nanoplastic particles allow them to penetrate deep into the cell and accumulate even within mitochondria, disrupting their function. Such a condition is known as mitochondrial dysfunction, a state in which mitochondria can no longer perform their essential roles. For comparison, a mitochondrion is approximately the size of a bacterium, while a nanoplastic particle is dozens of times smaller. Dr. Jeffrey Long, a radiation oncologist with many years of clinical experience and an expert on environmental exposures and their impact on human health, explains the destructive intracellular processes triggered by nanoplastic.
They can get into the cell and they can damage the critical parts of the cell, particularly mitochondria. Mitochondria in each cell in the human body is sort of the energy machine. It produces the stuff, raw stuff that provides energy to the entire rest of the cell. And it is frightening to understand, and increasingly so with increasing scientific studies, that nanoparticles nanoplastics, as they get in, are actually damaging the mitochondria, that energy-producing part of the cell. They're also damaging the part of the cell involved in division and reproduction called DNA. And certainly they can affect other molecules and proteins within the cell.
Mitochondria are the cell's energy and signaling center. They regulate metabolism, control cell growth and division, protect against oxidative stress, modulate inflammation and immune responses, and trigger programmed cell death. One of their key functions is cellular respiration, the process by which energy is produced. Energy in the human body is generated as follows. First, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates from food are broken down into simple molecules. These molecules then enter the mitochondria, where electrons are extracted from them. The electrons move along a specialized chain of proteins, much like an electric current passing through wires. This electron flow drives the mitochondrial energy machinery, resulting in the production of ATP, the universal fuel that powers all organs and tissues. A single mitochondrion can produce up to 10 million molecules of ATP per day. However, electrostatically charged nanoplastic interferes with this delicate process. Its particles disrupt movement of electrons and reduce the efficiency of ATP synthesis. It is similar to a power plant where the wiring begins to short circuit. The generator falters, energy output drops, and the entire system starts to fail more quickly. Mitochondria have their own DNA, a set of instructions for energy production. Without it, mitochondria cannot generate energy, and the cell gradually loses its power source and begins to deteriorate. Exposure to nanoplastic causes mutations to accumulate rapidly in mitochondrial DNA, further impairing mitochondrial function. Studies published in 2023 demonstrated that 50 nanometer polystyrene nanoparticles sharply reduce ATP production and increase the number of mutations in mitochondrial DNA.
We have studies on this, with dramatic images taken using a scanning electron microscope, as well as a transmission one, where you can actually see plastic destroying the mitochondria, the structures that produce a cell's energy.
Chronic exposure to nanoplastic turns cells into a battlefield. Their electrostatic charge prevents mitochondria from carrying out their essential functions, and this disruption marks the beginning of the slow decline of cells, tissues, and organs. We have now seen the key mechanisms by which charged nanoplastic particles damage cells. Each of these processes is destructive on their own, but they also occur simultaneously and amplify one another's effects. This chain reaction unleashes an avalanche of damages leading to cell death, and ultimately causing systemic breakdowns and accelerating biological aging.
Micro and nanoplastics accelerate aging. We tend to think that aging begins with wrinkles, gray hair, or fatigue. But in reality, it starts deep within the cells, with mitochondrial dysfunction and failures in key biological processes. Over time, damaged and dying cells accumulate, and the body loses its ability to renew itself. Aging is the gradual wear and tear of life's internal mechanisms. Scientists identify several main mechanisms of aging, such as oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, chronic inflammation, telomere shortening, DNA damage accumulation, epigenetic alterations. These same mechanisms underlie various diseases. When mitochondria can no longer produce sufficient energy, when DNA damage accumulates, and when inflammation becomes chronic, the organism grows increasingly vulnerable. This is when conditions such as diabetes, cancer, heart attack, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease begin to develop, and they all share one root cause: the aging of cells and tissues. Here's the crucial point. Electrostatically charged nanoplastic induces the same processes: oxidative stress, DNA damage, mitochondrial dysfunction, telomere shortening, chronic inflammation, and epigenetic alterations. Thus, electrostatically charged nanoplastic artificially accelerates cellular aging. What once unfolded over decades can now progress many times faster under its influence. And we are already witnessing the consequences. Diseases are becoming younger. Scientists have found that modern generations develop illnesses earlier and accumulate more chronic conditions than their parents did at the same age. Even a difference of just a few years now translates into noticeably higher rates of disease. Cancer and hypertension remain the most common conditions. Moreover, each subsequent generation shows an increase in the number of chronic conditions in a single individual. Diseases once considered age-related are increasingly found in young people. Notably, this trend coincides with the growing plastic pollution of the environment. As a result of exposure to electrostatically charged nanoplastic, the biological cell age of people in their 20s or 30s may already correspond to that of a 50 to 60-year-old person.
So very frightening how widespread nanoplastics are everywhere, probably each and every one of our cells. Even to you talking and among the audience listening, probably all of our cells have at least some nanoplastics.
So let's summarize. Aging is a gradual breakdown of the cells in our bodies. Nanoplastics accelerate this deterioration, and thus the aging itself through all those destructive processes within the cells that we have just talked about. And here lies the crucial point. The same mechanisms that drive aging also underlie many chronic diseases. In other words, micro and nanoplastics not only speed up aging, but also contribute to the development of diseases. Today, micro nanoplastics are detected in every organ of the human body, and everywhere, in each organ, in each cell. The tiny plastic particles trigger a cascade of internal destruction. Nanoplastics damage cell membranes, disrupt ion channels, induce oxidative stress, disable mitochondria, and provoke genetic mutations. These damages affect all cell types in the same way, whether in the heart, bones, lungs, or elsewhere. Now, we know the answer to the main question that began our investigation. Why, and by what mechanism, are nanoplastics capable of destroying living systems at the microscopic level? But what does that mean to us, for each of us? What specific diseases arise from such cellular destruction within the human body? The answers lie ahead in the next part of our investigation.